Okay, so I think I finally found a way to easily and effectively demonstrate graphically, visually, what the experience is like of being someone with greater meta-analytical capacities, not always to one's own benefit, mind you. What one might call neurodivergent, but specifically meta-analytical leaning, versus neurotypical or say average brain. What the difference in experience of thought is, as well as why it can make conversation and socializing rather difficult for one or both parties. So the way that nerve cells and thoughts work is our thoughts and memories are not located in one cell or one particular part of the brain consistently among individuals. As you grow up, starting from an early age, your body, your brain, is assigning certain neuron clusters to representing a given idea, like cat. The idea of cat will be located in a different cluster of cells in my brain than it will be in someone else's. But how thoughts form and how thinking as an action performs is these individual cells in this diagram, which are represented just by a single dot each, they have little ganglions, little tendrils that spread forth constantly, are constantly wiggling around, trying to attach to each other. And if the connection between them does not seem relevant relative to real life and the world and the environment, then it wiggles on back, that tendril, and doesn't form a strong connection between those neurons, those nerve cells. So our brain is constantly testing concepts in conjunction with each other, saying, are they related relative to what I have experienced in the past, as well as what I am experiencing now, with probably a greater emphasis on what I'm experiencing now, because what may have been true in the past could either have been a mistaken understanding or the situation itself and how it operates could have changed. So all of that said, how am I going to represent this here? So let's take, as I said, the neurodivergent, specifically the neurodivergent, very strong meta-analytical brain with a developed or overdeveloped frontal cortex. And we're going to look at it in 1 second, how the thoughts operate. And we're going from green is the first initial thought or thought web, if you will, and then blue, and then red, and this is meant to be an orange pen, but as opposed to colored pencils here of orange, but that is a different color, and that's where the thought ends. And so a neurotypical average brain, where we have the same core green, blue, red, and orange points, but just less parts branching off. And why that is because with a neurodivergent meta-analytical person's brain, in a given second, when we're in the first part of the thought in that given second, we will test 10 different ideas and a couple different offshoots of some of those ideas for relevancy to the topic and the consideration being presently performed before going to the next part and saying, okay, that's actually the most relevant. Of all these things we've tried, these two ideas are the most relevant. So that's connected. Okay, so then you go from there, and we're testing lots of different concepts and ideas as to what is or isn't, doesn't work or seems to be true in the world and environment, and goes forth, does that again. So it can be very overwhelming for the person themselves when, in a given second, where a normal person seems to have what one might quantify as one unit of thought, like one thought, whatever the unit for that, minimum unit is for that. A person such as myself, for example, will have, say, sometimes 6 to 10 times as many of those. And it is a flood of unconscious thoughts where your conscious brain, it's like a massive wave of thoughts that aren't even entirely your own wash over you. And your meta-analytical part of your brain, that is your self-consciousness, and much of your meta-analytical ability goes, whoa, back up. If I want to figure out why these connections are valid, I have to figure out what else I tried and relive the process consciously. And that can be very difficult with such a flood of constant thoughts going on. And in the process, while one can test more connections and learn more about life more quickly and, be constantly testing what concepts are true or not, it can also lead one to get lost in the weeds, so to speak, and sometimes get distracted. Particularly, say, if one is smoking weed, then those meta-analytical abilities that already were having a hard time keeping this all, within a certain fence line, so to speak, it breaks free and it's hard to stay focused. Whereas the neurotypical average brain will not test nearly as many connections and thus not learn as much, not be as skeptical, not as critical. But at the same time, things are simpler, and sometimes that's actually more effective, especially for them as an individual. The neurodivergent meta-analytical people oftentimes are more used to their society than a neurotypical person, but they're not much used to themselves, is what my experience has been largely, and what I've witnessed in others. So, how does that pertain to conversation? Well, I have replicated the exact same little thought tree of nerves right here from above for the neurodivergent, and I'm introducing another one for another neurodivergent person with an equivalent color system. It's all still taking place in 1 second or a given quanta of time. And what is happening when you are having a discussion with another person who is strongly meta-analytical and has all these offshoots is every single one of these that I am testing in my head as I go along, at least some of them, as many as I can express quick enough with words relative to my thought, I will be expressing as many possible of these connections as I'm trying as possible, and I'm expressing that to the other person, and they are doing the same in turn. So as you see, there's tons of back and forth at the green stage, at the blue stage, at the red stage of this process, whereas if you compare it to a conversation between a neurodivergent person and a neurotypical person, and once again, I've taken this one and just brought them on down. If you see here, the average person gets overwhelmed because the neurodivergent person is verbalizing all of these connections they're attempting, like this, going one way, like all of from here and here and here and here and here, are all going to whichever points they can find at that phase in the other person. But when there's so few other considerations for that tier of thought or that phase of the thought for the other person, these nerve cells are having to try and receive signals effectively, if you will, from 6 different nerve cells from this person and only send out 1 or 2 themselves. They get effectively overwhelmed, and the person's brain and the person in turn gets overwhelmed in the process. Conversely, the neurodivergent person suffers because they are having all of this flood of thoughts that they can't represent, and the overwhelming majority of these that they are testing, they are not allowed effectively to express to the person. So not only are they increasingly building up thoughts that they can't express in the course of a given conversation, but they are also receiving far less information and considerations of a variety from the other person, which makes the conversation far less stimulating and very boring a lot of times, to be honest. You feel rather impatient as you're waiting to get on with the conversation and new points. So yeah, that's the best way I've come to visually represent that, because again, this is literally how we've determined in recent years, as I theorized pretty good period of time ago, before it was kind of confirmed, that the nerve cells are literally, there's GIFs, little animated GIFs of nerve cells over time, and it shows the little ganglions, little tendrils, crawling towards each other and either forming a strong connection to another one of the nerve cells, or going on back and retracting. So again, a neurodivergent person with strong meta-analytical abilities will consider 10, 15 things relative to the first phase of thought before they even move on. And a neurotypical person will consider just a couple. And that can be a plus and a minus in a lot of different ways. But in terms of experience of thought and social experience, it can be very, very difficult for a meta-analytical person for those aforementioned reasons. So I hope that this did a fairly decent job of visually representing what that process and that difficulty is like. I will say, of course, that seeing something visually and experiencing it are certainly two very different things. Without getting too histrionic or whingy, I will say, for example, viewing a picture of someone getting tortured and actually experiencing the torture are two rather different things, to draw a parallel. So it can be a rather difficult experience of life with this manner of thought, but it also potentially provides the greatest benefits to the superorganism. So it's rather a wash, kind of, in good and bad traits as stemming from that.